Hi, it's Penny here, and today I wanted to talk about some unpopular books by popular authors. So basically, I have a list of authors who are very popular, but I want to recommend to you some of their less popular works. Well, one's going to be an anti-recommendation, but we'll get to that. And initially, I was thinking of popularity in terms of books I hear people talk about all the time, books I hear people rave about all the time, versus the less popular books that people hardly ever talk about. But then I have also pulled out the Goodreads definition of popularity, which is basically the number of ratings, which I've often complained about, but actually in this case I don't think it's too bad at representing what I'm trying to talk about. So I've ordered these authors from the ones that have the most ratings on Goodreads through to the least. And the first one on the list is going to be Brandon Sanderson, who has 7.9 million ratings on Goodreads. 2.9 million of those are the Mistborn series. I think 2 million of those were the original Mistborn trilogy. 2 million Stormlight. And then, he's written 1 million books. So that's part of how he's gotten so many ratings, just by pumping out 1 million books. But I have also really loved a lot of his books. One in particular that was actually one of the inspirations for this video concept is Dark One Forgotten. So this he actually wrote with Dan Wells, and it is also only available as an audiobook, which is probably part of why it only has 1.9 thousand. So that's significantly less than the 2 million ratings that his more popular series have. And I guess the audiobook audience is smaller. Also, this is very different from his most popular series, although he does have a decent little collection of stories he's written that are more like investigation mystery stories. So Dark One Forgotten is told in podcast style, which is why it's only available in that audiobook format. And we're following our main character who has discovered this violin player in the past that was beginning to gain notoriety and then just kind of disappeared from everyone's memories. And as they investigate this, they kind of learn this link into a more magical world. I really love this. I thought the tone of it was great. The way they managed to express the story through the podcast format was great. Honestly, I had a great time with this. Also, though, I do want to mention Elantris as one of Brandon Sanderson's less popular works. Now, this one does still have 467,000 ratings, so that's still a decent amount for a single book. But whenever I see people talk about Elantris, it seems I often feel the need to say that it's not his best work. Now, I would say, especially given latest receptions to Wind and Truth, that I don't agree with that. I've never agreed with that. I've always thought Elantris is a really solid example of what he can do, and unfortunately what he doesn't seem to be doing as much in some of his later releases. But if you want a fantasy zombie story with a cool magic system and a little bit of political scheming, I don't think Elantris is a bad place to start. And just while we're here, I will say I was also quite surprised to see that Skyward only has 432,000 ratings for the whole quartet. It's quartet, right? I really had thought that would have been higher. I will also say there are a number of other series that he has here that I saw only had a lower number of ratings, definitely higher than some of the other authors we'll get to lower on this list. But if you're only thinking of Sanderson in terms of Mistborn and Stormlight Archives, and you're interested in other types of fantasy and sci-fi, then you might want to dig around in his backlist. Anyway, then the next author that I wanted to talk about, I was actually really surprised that I ended up putting as high on this list as I did. And that is Veronica Roth, who has 7.8 million ratings. So that's only 0.1 of a million, 100,000 less than Brandon Sanderson. Now, admittedly, 7.5 million of those ratings are Divergent. That's a lot. I don't know if I should have been surprised, but I'm really surprised about that being as high as it is. Especially when you look at the new series that Veronica Roth has just started. Admittedly, she has just started it. There's only one book out so far, with another one being released this year, and that is the Cursebearer series. That only has 19,000 ratings, so that's significantly less. Now, admittedly, that book series is very different. It's much more fantastical with a more lyrical writing style and a much more emotionally driven story. Both in that the story is focused on the emotions of the characters, but some of the characters are vampires that eat emotions. Anyway, that is a series that I have a lot of hope for. I do also have on my TBR Chosen Ones by Veronica Roth, which initially looked like it was going to be a series. Now it looks like it's a standalone. And it's only got 26.7 thousand ratings. And it's about these teenagers that were the chosen one. They took down the Dark One. I think he is called the Dark One, but now that I've just talked about Brandon Sanderson, Dark One Forgotten, I'm doubting myself. Anyway, they took down this evil guy and now they're all kind of traumatized by that, and then I believe they're going to have to face down some new evil. So that's on my TBR and I'm excited about that one. Third on the list is actually Holly Black with 5.2 million. Now 3.7 million of that is the Alfheim books, which includes The Folk of the Air and Stolen Air. And even though I have liked some things by Holly Black, those are romantasy books. I have zero interest in reading those. But I do have some Holly Black books that I do like to recommend. Firstly, we have the Curse Workers trilogy. This is more of a YA series following this young boy at school whose parents are all kind of con artists in this world where most magic is based on touch. And so I believe all magic workers are supposed to wear gloves so that they can't do magic. But his con artist mother often wears gloves with holes in them. And he's kind of dealing with the politics of the magical world and the fallout of some terrible things that have happened as part of his family. Anyway, if you like a YA school fantasy, I think you could like that. And it only has 96,000 ratings. Also, with 186,000 ratings, so that's like still quite a lot, but it is a 5-book series, so that makes it spread out more. But I definitely don't hear people talking about this much, and that is the Magisterium series that Holly Black wrote with Cassandra Clare, and it's basically like a middle grade, maybe leaning into young adult, but definitely younger young adult magic school story, like a little bit like Harry Potter. We have this chosen one who has a connection to this dark figure in the magical world, and he's also like working his way through the magical school, even though his father never wanted him to go to the magic school because his father told him all magicians are evil, but he's ended up at the magic school anyway. I really like the Magisterium series, and I don't know why it doesn't get talked about more. And I think it's definitely a valid replacement for Harry Potter. Also, Book of Night by Holly Black. It only has 79,000 ratings. I think the second book of that series is coming out soon. I didn't really like the first book, but I'll be interested to see the reception the second one gets. Next on my list is V.E. Schwab, or Victoria Schwab as she sometimes publishes. So she has 3.2 million ratings. And I was actually really surprised that 1.3 million of those is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I actually thought the Shades of Magic series would be higher, but that whole series, including the latest like new trilogy that she's writing in that world, only has 868,000 ratings, so like significantly less than the single book of The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. But the book series I want to recommend for Victoria Schwab is actually another more YA series. Maybe that's why people have overlooked it, but I still think it's got a lot of Victoria Schwab in it. So we're following this young girl who's basically in charge of the key to the archived. It's been a while since I read this one, but she has the key to the archived where the memories of the dead are stored, and sometimes they will escape and she has to help track them down and take them back. And she's also kind of struggling with the loss of her grandfather, which is how she became the person that's responsible for this. And the story kind of works through a bit of a mystery with the archived, along with her working through kind of her family's situation. And I really liked this. I'm pretty sure I've read somewhere that there was a plan for Victoria Schwab to write a third book in this and make it a trilogy. I don't know if she'll ever do it, but I would love it if she would. Because this only has 57,000 ratings, but if she put out another book in the series, that would probably jump up a lot, I think. And I think a lot of people could enjoy this. Okay, next with 2.4 million ratings, we have Andy Weir. So The Martian is half of those ratings with 1.2 million. And then Project Hail Mary is 772,000. And then his other book, Artemis, is the least popular one of this that I wanted to recommend to you. It's only got 300,000 ratings. And to be honest, I can't recommend it because I ended up not really liking it. So that's a shame. I think if you look at it, it seems like it's going to be really cool because it finally has a female protagonist and it's going to be set on the moon. And in the past, I have said, I think this is bad because Andy Weir doesn't know how to write women. But I'm feeling more generous today, I guess. And I've been thinking about it. Both The Martian and Project Hail Mary, our main characters are mainly by themselves in a life or death kind of situation where they're just trying to survive and they're problem solving to achieve that. In Artemis, we have this woman kind of trying to pull off this criminal heist and she's having to interact with people. I'm now wondering if it's just that Andy Weir can't write interactions with people. Is that more generous or not? Maybe not. Anyway, this was one of the books that inspired this video concept, but unfortunately I can't recommend it. And it's probably reasonable that it's got so many fewer ratings. Then we have Maggie Stiefvater with 2 million ratings. 961,000 of those is The Raven Cycle, with like 70k for the Dreamers trilogy, which was the follow-on trilogy from that series. And then her series, I think that was released previous to The Raven Cycle, The Wolves of Mercy Falls, of which there is going to be a TV show, I think, coming out soon. That has 827,000. I was actually kind of surprised that that was as high as it is. But if you take those numbers, there's not much left for the rest of her books before we hit those 2 million ratings. And All the Crooked Saints only has 23,000 ratings, and I loved this. So I think this is definitely underhyped. We're kind of following this family of saints that grant people miracles that help them work through their life issues or the darkness in their lives. But the way it kind of works is that they grant them the first miracle, which in some ways will seem more like a curse. And then they almost grant themselves the second miracle by learning to deal with that curse, kind of address their personal issues. I don't know, it's all written in such an over-the-top way. Like, it's inspired by a lot of magical realism where you can't quite tell what's real and what's not, like what's just exaggeration in the writing style. But I just love the emotional journeys of all the characters, and it's something I felt I could relate to. And I just love Maggie Stiefvater's writing and the level she took it to in this. Then I was very surprised to discover the next author as far down the list as this. We have Robin Hobb with only 1.8 million ratings. Honestly, 1.8 million ratings is still massive, heaps, but once you've talked about 8 million ratings, it doesn't seem like that much, which is ridiculous. Anyway, The Realm of the Elderlings is 1.6 million of that, so like a significant proportion of it. But I always want to recommend the Soldier Son trilogy, which I feel like is very similar to the original Assassins trilogy, because we have this young man like trying to find his place in the world, really trying to live up to the expectations of his family, but kind of struggling with the bigger things going on in the world. And I think when I see people complain about this series, they're either complaining about the main character and saying he's insufferable, but I feel like people have a lot of the same complaints around Fitz. Or the other thing I see people complain about is the fat phobia, and I will say there is a representation of fat phobia in the series, but I personally really liked the way it was done. I think it could be triggering, could be really hard to read, but I think I still really appreciated what I thought was a very realistic representation. I've just realized I also wanted to tell you about some stuff by Megan Lindholm, which is a pen name of Robin Hobb, but if I'm going to do that, I need to add in Megan Lindholm's rating count, but she only has 36,000 ratings, even though I really want to recommend to you Wizard of the Pigeons, which is kind of like a fantasy story about some homeless people living, I think in Boston. It's hard to remember, and you're never really sure if this is just like some kind of delusion brought on by PTSD or some kind of drug addiction, or is it actually happening? It's so unclear, but it has some really great messages. And it only has 1.5 thousand ratings. Ridiculous. More people should read that. Robin Hobb does also have, as Megan Lindholm, 2 other fantasy series, the Windsinger series and the Reindeer People, and I've tried the first chapter of both of those, and they're both on my TBR. I'm very excited to get to them at some point. So I think those are probably worth having on your radar as well if you really like Robin Hobb. Okay, then we have Martha Wells, who has 1.1 million ratings, and 1 million of those is the Murderbot series. And I love the Murderbot series. Definitely deserves all the excitement it's getting at the moment around the TV show, even though I'm still very worried that the TV show isn't going to match the tone of Murderbot that's in my head. But I guess we'll see. But I have also read Witch King by Martha Wells, which is part of the Rising World series, and I think the second book in that series is coming out soon. And the first book only has 22,000 ratings, so definitely not at the same level as the Murderbot series, although I'm comparing one book to multiple books, so that's not fair. And I would also say the tone of The Rising World is very different, like much more fantasy than Murderbot. Murderbot is more sci-fi, humorous relatableness. So they're very different, but I still think if you like fantasy, you could really like The Rising World. I have also been recommended 2 other series by Martha Wells, the Books of the Rixura, and also, I don't know how to say it, Illyrian. Those only have 44,000 and 17,000 ratings. So again, not very many. Now, if you really love Martha Wells and you like fantasy, you might also want to put them on your TBR like I have. Okay, next on my list is Oliver Blake, and I do think it's interesting. So she has 536,000 ratings, which is still a lot, but I'm pretty sure at the beginning of this video when I was talking about Brandon Sanderson, I was talking about books with like 300,000 ratings, or like Elantris had 400,000-ish ratings, and I was saying that was less popular. Anyway, everything's relative. So 354,000 ratings of Oliver Blake's The Atlas series, which of course was very popular. And then also another 100,000 for Alone with You in the Ether, which is kind of like a neurodivergent romance story. I do also occasionally see people talking about Masters of Death, which has 40,000 ratings. Like, that was weird. I don't know if I loved it, but I think if you really like the Atlas series, you could really love Masters of Death. And then One for My Enemy, which only has 30,000 ratings, and I loved it. Honestly, I loved it much more than the Atlas, and I'm not sure why it hasn't gotten quite as much traction. But also, released last year, I think, in January. Have I made that up? 2024, it says. Anyway, we have January's by Oliver Blake. So this only has 2.4 thousand ratings. Now, admittedly, it's a short story anthology. Is that what's putting people off? Because when I look at her other books, I feel like this should have at least 10,000. Do people not realize that the book has pictures? Do people not realize that the short stories are really good short stories? Like, I've already read this, and I bought this with the plan that in spring I will start reading or rereading one of these stories each month. Like, I think people are missing out on this, is what I'm saying. And I'm confused about why that is when I'm seeing Oliver Blake like all over the place lately. Maybe it's just the bubble I'm in. Okay, then lastly, we have Rebecca Roanhorse. Now, I felt like I've seen her books talked about all over the place, or specifically the Between Earth and Sky trilogy. I saw a lot of people talking about that series. But Rebecca Roanhorse only has 200,000 ratings, and only 76,500 of those ratings were for the Between Earth and Sky trilogy, which is lower than I would have expected. But still, when I'm talking about less popular books, I'm talking about relative to their most popular things. So the ones I want to recommend to you is 2 things. Firstly, the Six World series, maybe, by Rebecca Roanhorse. There's been 2 books released so far. Possibly the series is now not continuing. I'm going to cry if that's ever like confirmed as true in my heart. To be honest, it's been confirmed as true and I just am in denial. It's like a post-apocalyptic fantasy where we have this Native American woman who has these different, I think they're like God-granted abilities. It's been a while since I've read this and I'm definitely keen to reread it because I love the series. I love our main character. I love the incorporation of like the Native American gods. I loved the action. I love the romance even, and I don't usually like romance, but this was one where I liked it. Like, I thought this was great, and I wish more people would read it so that Rebecca Roanhorse would have the motivation to continue the series. That's what I'm hoping. Also, she did have this little novella called Tread of Angels, which only has 5.7 thousand reviews, and it's kind of a really cool little mystery in this world where there's angels and demons, but I love the world building of it. I would love to see this like expanded into a full series as well. So again, read it and maybe she'll be motivated. So that's all my recommendation of unpopular books by popular authors and maybe a little bit of a discussion about popularity as numbers. Honestly, popularity is always going to be something that's hard to measure, but it is interesting to look at the numbers. Let me know if you have any recommendations of less popular books by popular authors, as I would love to chat with you about them down in the comments, or if you've read any of the unpopular books that I talked about in this video, I would also love to chat with you about them. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.